The barn door swung open like a coffin lid, creaking against the pre-dawn wind that swept across the Kansas prairie with the promise of another merciless day. Jedediah Holt stepped into the musty darkness, his boots crushing dried hay beneath his feet, and froze solid. A woman lay crumpled against the far wall, dark hair matted with blood, her torn dress stained with dirt and something darker. Her breathing came in shallow gasps that barely rose above the wind's mournful song through the rafters. One bare foot jutted from beneath her skirts, the ankle twisted wrong. Jed's weathered hand moved to the Colt at his hip, then stopped. The woman's face turned toward him in the pale starlight, bore fresh bruises that hadn't yet purpled. Her lips were cracked and bleeding, her green eyes fluttering open with the glazed look of someone dancing on death's doorstep. "Help me." The words escaped her throat like a dying prayer. Thunder rolled across the flat land, not storm clouds, but the drum of horses' hooves against hard earth. The woman's eyes snapped into desperate focus, fixing on Jed's face with an intensity that cut through him like a blade. "They're coming," she whispered, blood speckling her lips. "Please, don't let them take me back." At 34, Jedediah Holt had built his life on one simple rule: mind your own business and expect others to do the same. His face bore the deep lines carved by sun wind, and the kind of grief that never fully healed 3 years since consumption took his wife Sarah, leaving him to raise their boy alone on a failing ranch outside Ash Hollow. The spread was mortgaged to the breaking point. Cattle thin from drought, well dropping daily. 9-year-old Eli moved through their world like a ghost, silent as the grave, since they'd buried his mother. Doc Morrison said the silence might lift, but time seemed to be running out for everything in Jed's world. The broken woman in his barn changed all calculations. Name's Mara Linwood. She told him after he'd carried her inside, settling her in Sarah's old rocking chair. Doc Morrison cleaned her wounds, while Jed watched the horizon, where dust clouds marked her pursuer's passage. "I was meant to marry Thomas Kettering in Dodge City." Mara continued, voice gaining strength as Doc worked. "The arrangement wasn't what I was promised." Jed knew enough about mail-order brides to fill the gaps. Men painted pictures of prosperity in letters that crumbled when women stepped off trains. Some found happiness despite the lies. Others found only misery or worse. The men chasing you, Kettering's people. Mara's hands trembled accepting coffee from Eli, who studied her with intense curiosity. The boy hadn't spoken in 3 years, but something in his dark eyes suggested recognition that went deeper than words. His brothers. "They blame me for Thomas's death." Her voice dropped. "They're not wrong." That afternoon brought an unexpected ally, Reverend Isaiah Crane, arriving with genuine concern rather than his usual divine authority. Tall and angular, with steel-gray hair and winter sky eyes, Crane had held Ash Hollow's spiritual reins for over a decade. "Jed." Crane's gaze found Mara on the porch, ankle propped on a crate. "I heard about your guest. How is she?" "Healing slowly." "Good. That's good." Crane stepped closer, voice dropping with what seemed like genuine compassion. "You did right taking her in. Christian charity demands no less, whatever gossip may follow." Jed blinked, surprised. He'd expected condemnation, not support. Some folks might not see it that way. Then some folks need reminding about the Good Samaritan. Crane's smile seemed genuine. "I'll address the congregation Sunday. Make clear that helping the wounded is God's work, not man's judgment." After Crane left, Mara watched his retreating figure with puzzled eyes. "Strange," she murmured. "What's strange?" "Nothing. Just, he seems familiar somehow. But I can't place where." 3 days later, trouble rode into town. Wearing the faces of Marcus and Samuel Kettering, hard men with winter stone eyes and grief worn like armor. They dismounted outside the saloon just after noon, horses lathered with pursuit. "We're hunting a murderer," Marcus announced to anyone listening. Dark hair, green eyes, calls herself Mara Linwood. killed our brother, and ran like the coward she is. Word reached Jed's ranch within the hour via young Danny Hendricks, who'd ridden out at a gallop. The boy's face flushed with excitement and fear as he delivered warning. They're asking questions all over town, showing a picture offering money. Ma said I should warn you. Mara went pale as milk, hearing the news hands shaking so violently she couldn't hold her cup. I have to leave, tonight, before they find me. Running won't solve anything, Jed said firmly. Where would you go? They'll track you down eventually. I won't let you sacrifice your family for me. Before Jed could respond, Eli spoke for the first time in 3 years. His voice came out rusty, barely more than whisper, but every word carried absolute conviction. You're not sacrifice, you're family. The declaration hit both adults like physical blows. Mara's eyes filled with tears she'd held back for days, while Jed felt something tight and painful shift in his chest. That night, as Mara prepared to slip away under darkness, the Kettering brothers struck. They came with calculated precision, Marcus at the front, Samuel circling back trap with no escape. They hadn't counted on Eli. The boy had been sleeping fitfully when soft footsteps on the porch sent him creeping to the window. What he saw, a man with drawn gun moving like a predator toward the door, galvanized him. They're here. The shout shattered night silence like gunfire, giving Jed precious seconds to reach his Winchester and position himself between door and where Mara crouched behind the kitchen table. When Marcus kicked in the door, he found himself staring down a rifle barrel held by a man with nothing left to lose. Easy, friend. Marcus said, his own weapon trained on Jed's chest. We don't want trouble with you. Just hand over the woman. She's under my protection. Protection. Marcus's laugh held no humor. You don't know what she is. That woman murdered our brother in cold blood. I know she defended herself against a man twice her size. The standoff stretched until Samuel's arrival through the back door tipped the balance. Death seemed certain for everyone in the room. Then Mara stood up, not defiantly, not with desperate courage, but with dignity that filled the small room like morning light. Her injured ankle nearly buckled, but she held herself straight, facing the men who'd pursued her across 3 states. You want me, you've got me, but leave them out of this. Marcus studied her, trying to reconcile flesh-and-blood woman with the monster his grief had created. What he saw clearly wasn't what he'd expected. You're coming with us. I know. Mara's acceptance was total heartbreaking. Just let me say goodbye. She knelt to Eli's eye level, placing scarred hands on his small shoulders. You keep talking, you hear your voice as a gift. Don't go, Eli whispered. I have to, but I'll never forget you. As Mara rose to face her captors, Jed made the decision that would define his life. Setting his rifle aside, he stepped between the brothers and their quarry. She's not going anywhere. The hell she's not, Samuel snarled. She's my intended wife. Under territorial law that gives me the right to demand she face charges in court, not at a rope's end. The lie came so smoothly that even Mara believed it momentarily. The brothers exchanged uncertain glances, their simple plan complicated by legal technicalities. You're bluffing, Marcus said, doubt coloring his voice. Try me. Judge Whitmore would be very interested in armed men breaking into homes threatening women. Finally, Marcus lowered his weapon with obvious reluctance. This isn't over. We'll be watching. One step out of line and we'll finish what we started. After they left the house, felt like a tomb. Mara sat in stunned silence, while Eli huddled against his father's side. Thank you, Mara said finally, for the lie about us being engaged. Jed turned from the window, weathered face serious in lamplight. Who says it was a lie? The words hung weighted with possibilities neither had dared consider. Mara stared at him with those green eyes that had haunted his dreams. Jed, I know it's sudden, but that boy hasn't spoken in 3 years until you showed up. You're the first person to make this house feel like home since Sarah died. Whatever happened in Dodge City, you're not the monster those men think you are. So she told him. about the arranged marriage that seemed like salvation to an orphaned girl with no prospects, about Thomas Kettering's letters full of promises that crumbled into reality, a violent drunk who used fists to solve problems, and his wife as convenient target. "I tried everything," she whispered. "Nothing was ever right." She described the night Thomas died with clinical precision. The drinking, gambling losses fury that built like thunderstorm until it broke over her head. He had his hands around my throat. I was dying, and something inside refused to let that happen. I grabbed the fireplace poker and hit him once. When he fell and hit his head on the hearth, I thought he was just stunned. By the time I realized he was dead, his brothers were already riding toward the house. "Self-defense," Jed said firmly. "That's what I told the sheriff." But Thomas's brothers painted a different picture, the scheming Eastern woman who killed for money. Half the town believed them. Jed was quiet, digesting the story. When he spoke, his voice was gentle but determined. "None of that changes what I said. If you'll have me have us, I'd be honored to call you my wife." The next morning brought Ash Hollow's judgment crashing down. Word had spread with scandal's speed, and by the time Jed drove to town for supplies, he faced a community united in disapproval. Martha Crowley greeted his arrival with cold politeness, usually reserved for tax collectors. "Morning, Jed. I suppose you'll be wanting your usual order." "That's right. I'm afraid we need payment in advance now. Cash only." Her voice dripped with righteous satisfaction. "Can't extend credit to folks harboring questionable elements." "Questionable elements? Don't play innocent with me, Jedediah Holt. We all know what that woman is and what she's done. Bringing her to church service won't wash the blood from her hands." Frank Crowley emerged from the back room looking uncomfortable. "Now, Martha, don't now Martha me. This is our store and we have standards to maintain." She turned back to Jed. "Your money's good, but your companion isn't welcome here." The message was clear. Trust was a commodity suddenly in short supply. Jed paid without complaint, but couldn't miss how conversations stopped when he entered rooms, how eyes followed his movements with suspicious intensity. The real confrontation came at Sunday service. Reverend Crane took his pulpit with the promised defense, but his words carried unexpected authority. "Brothers and sisters," he began finding Jed's family in their back pew, "we face a test of our Christian compassion. There are those who would judge without knowledge, condemn without understanding." Mara sat perfectly still between Jed and Eli, hands folded, but her knuckles were white with tension. The good book tells us to welcome the stranger, heal the wounded, protect the defenseless. Yet I hear whispers in our streets, see hatred in hearts that should overflow with mercy. Crane's voice built with conviction. "This woman came to us broken and bleeding, seeking only shelter from those who would do her harm. How we respond reveals not her character, but our own." Ellen Carver nodded approvingly. Doc Morrison's jaw relaxed, but several congregation members shifted uncomfortably, clearly unhappy with their preacher's stance. "We must ask ourselves." Crane continued. "Whether we follow Christ's example of compassion or Pharisee traditions of judgment. Whether we see the person before us or only the accusations of those who were not present to witness truth." After service, Mayor Hutchins approached with diplomatic casualness. "Jed, might I have a word?" They gathered in the church's shade. Hutchins Bank President Coleman, 2 council members. The message was predictable as sunrise. "It's about your situation." Hutchins began diplomatically. "The woman you're protecting. Some concerns have been raised." "What concerns?" Coleman stepped forward, banker's instincts finely tuned to weakness. "Financial concerns. Your mortgage payments have been irregular, cattle sales dropped, and now this complication. Some wonder if you're still a good risk. Are you calling in my note?" "Not yet. But the bank must consider its position. If you continue to complicate matters, we might reconsider our flexibility. The threat was delicate but clear: conform or lose everything. I'll need time to think. Of course, but don't take too long. These situations get out of hand quickly. That evening, storm clouds gathered as Mara packed her belongings in Sarah's old carpet bag, moving like someone memorizing every detail. I won't let you lose everything because of me, she told Jed. You've given me more than I deserved. Where will you go? West, California, Oregon, somewhere the past can't follow. Running doesn't solve problems. Sometimes it's enough. She managed a weak smile. I'm good at starting over. Soft footsteps on stairs interrupted them. Eli appeared in the doorway, hair tousled, clutching his carved wooden horse. Without words, he walked to Mara and placed the toy in her hands. For me, she asked gently. Eli nodded, then spoke again, voice stronger than before. So you remember us when you're gone. So you know we loved you. Mara's composure cracked. She pulled Eli into fierce embrace, tears finally spilling as thin arms wrapped around her neck. I could never forget you, either of you. Morning came with the stage to Dodge City and impossible choices. Jed hitched the wagon in grim silence while they loaded Mara's bag. Eli appeared on the porch, fully dressed despite the early hour. I'm coming too, he announced with matter-of-fact certainty. Son, if she goes, I go. Jed stared at his boy, this child who'd barely spoken in 3 years, and saw Sarah's stubborn determination written in every line of his face. The stage leaves whether we're there or not, Mara said softly, resolve wavering. In the distance, the stage horn sounded its mournful call. Then maybe, Jed said, making the decision that would change everything, we shouldn't be there. The weeks that followed tested every assumption Ash Hollow held about justice and Christian charity. Jed's decision transformed their ranch into an island of defiance, and consequences were swift and merciless. Business dried up with devastating efficiency. Ranchers who'd bought his cattle for years discovered alternative sources. Feed store clerks were polite but distant. Credit evaporated, forcing them to subsist on what they could grow or hunt. The harassment began with anonymous threats and escalated to vandalism. They woke one morning to find "whore" painted in red letters across the barn paint, still wet enough to drip. Eli stood before the graffiti, face pale as winter sky. Just words. Jed told his son, though his voice carried edges sharp enough to cut. Help me clean it. They scrubbed together while Mara watched from the kitchen window. The paint came off, but intention's stain remained visible in wood-grain hatred once expressed left permanent marks. 3 nights later, they found their water trough poisoned wooden planks, warped and blackened. A week after that, someone cut their fence line and scattered cattle across 3 counties. But the worst came on a Thursday evening when Jed rode to town for supplies, leaving Mara and Eli alone. The attack came just after sunset. 3 masked riders surrounding the house while Mara prepared supper and Eli played on the kitchen floor. "I come out, woman," the leader shouted through the door. "Time to face what you've done." Mara grabbed the shotgun Jed kept loaded above the fireplace, hands shaking but resolve steady. "Stay down," she whispered to Eli, who'd gone white with terror. "Whatever happens, stay down. We know you're in there. Come out peaceful. Maybe we won't burn the place." The threat sent ice through Mara's veins. She'd survived fire once, barely. The thought of flames consuming their sanctuary was almost unbearable. But Eli trapped in Inferno was infinitely worse. "What do you want?" she called, stalling while her mind raced. "A justice for Thomas Kettering." Thomas was a drunk and wife-beater. I defended myself. Lies come out and face punishment. The standoff continued until one attacker tried forcing the back door. Splintering wood sent Mara into motion with desperate fury. She met the intruder in the kitchen doorway, with both shotgun barrels, the blast deafeningly loud. The man screamed and stumbled backward, clutching his shoulder where buckshot tore through cloth and flesh. Blood streamed between his fingers as he collapsed on the porch. "She shot Billy," someone shouted. "Then we burn her out. No more games." Mara heard a torch being lit, saw orange glow dancing against the window. In moments, the house would blaze, and she and Eli would face the choice between burning alive or running into guns. Salvation arrived as Doc Morrison's buggy racing down the ranch road at breakneck speed, with the doctor cracking his whip like a man possessed. Behind him rode Judge Whitmore and 2 deputy marshals drawn by gunfire and torch glow visible from town. The attackers scattered like leaves before Hurricane abandoning their wounded companion and arson plans. Within minutes, danger passed, but the message was delivered: Mara Linwood wasn't welcome, and those protecting her would pay. As Doc tended the wounded attacker, Billy Hutchins, the mayor's wayward nephew, Judge Whitmore, questioned Mara about the evening's events. "This has to stop," he said finally. "I'll post guards, but that's treating symptoms. The real problem runs deeper. What do you suggest? A public hearing. Let both sides present their case in daylight, where everyone can hear truth instead of whispered rumors. Won't satisfy everyone, but might prevent more bloodshed." When Jed returned to find his home surrounded by deputy marshals and Doc stitching up a wounded man on his porch, his first thought was that he'd lost everything that mattered. Relief on Mara's face when she saw him safe nearly brought him to his knees. "Are you hurt?" he demanded, pulling her into his arms. "No, scared but not hurt. They wanted to burn us out, Jed. If Doc hadn't arrived. But he did. You're safe. That's all that matters." Ellen Carver arrived the next morning with a surprising proposal. "I need an assistant at the school," she announced without preamble. "Someone to help with younger children while I work with older ones. Pay isn't much, but it's honest work." Mara stared in amazement. "You'd risk your position for me. I'm risking it for the children. Some are falling behind because I can't give individual attention." Ellen's voice carried conviction. "From what Eli tells me, you have teaching experience." "Some. Before I married Thomas, I taught in Pennsylvania." "Then it's settled. We start Monday." The offer felt like sunlight through storm clouds. Mara had loved teaching before her disastrous marriage. "I'd like that very much. A fair warning, some parents won't be happy. But children see past prejudices their elders cling to. Give them a chance." Ellen's prediction proved accurate. Several parents pulled children from school rather than expose them to Mara's corrupting influence. But others began seeing past rumors to reality, a patient, skilled teacher who genuinely cared about their children's welfare. 8-year-old Lucy Patterson, who'd struggled with reading, began devouring books under Mara's encouragement. The Morton twins, notorious troublemakers, competed to please their new teacher instead of torment classmates. "She has a gift," Ellen confided to Jed when he collected Eli after school. "Some teachers teach lessons. Mara teaches children. There's a world of difference." But success brought renewed pressure. Reverend Crane's sermons grew more pointed, his references to corruption more specific. Though strangely, he seemed to be arguing both sides. "We must be vigilant against those who would use our compassion as weakness," he preached one Sunday. "Yet we must also guard against hardness of heart that mistakes fear for righteousness." The mixed messages confused many congregants, but Mara found herself oddly comforted by Crane's continued, if complex, support. 2 weeks later, everything changed. Doc Morrison appeared at the school during afternoon recess, his weathered face grave with purpose. He waited until children were occupied before approaching Mara and Ellen. "There's something you need to know," he said quietly. "About Reverend Crane." Mara felt ice settle in her stomach. "What about him?" "I've been thinking about what you said about him seeming familiar. Started me remembering things I'd tried to forget." Doc glanced around to ensure they weren't overheard. 15 years ago, I was practicing in Missouri. There was a man there, went by Isaac Caldwell, who made his living arranging marriages between Eastern women and Western men. Marriage broker, fraud artist. He'd falsify references, invent dowries that didn't exist, take money from both sides while lying to everyone involved. When things went bad, and they usually did, he'd make sure the women took all the blame. Mara's world tilted sideways. You think Crane is... I know he is. Saw him up close when one of his victims came to me after her husband beat her near to death. Isaac Caldwell had a distinctive scar on his left wrist shaped like a crescent moon. Our good Reverend has the same mark. Why haven't you said anything? Doc's face flushed with shame. Because I was a coward. The woman died of her injuries, and I was too afraid of Caldwell's connections to testify at the inquest. I've regretted that silence every day since. The implications crashed over Mara like a landslide. If Crane was really Isaac Caldwell, then he hadn't just arranged her marriage to Thomas Kettering, he'd orchestrated her entire nightmare, then followed her to Ash Hollow to ensure his secret stayed buried. There's more, Doc continued grimly. I've been making inquiries. Caldwell Crane has been here longer than anyone realizes. He arrived in Ash Hollow the same month you married Thomas Kettering. Too much coincidence. He's been watching me. Mara whispered, pieces falling into place. All this time playing both sides, defending me publicly, while privately ensuring I stayed under suspicion. And now that the Kettering brothers are sniffing around, he's getting desperate. Doc's voice carried urgent warning. Desperate men do dangerous things. That evening, as Mara sat on the porch processing Doc's revelations, a rider approached through the gathering dusk. She recognized Jake Winters, an elderly traveling preacher who'd been boarding at the hotel since the previous week. Evening, Mrs. Holt. Winters said, dismounting with the careful movements of age. Might I have a word? Of course. It's about Reverend Crane. See, I knew him before he came to Ash Hollow. Back in Missouri, went by different name than Isaac Caldwell. Mara's heart hammered against her ribs. What do you know about him? Enough to hang him twice over. That man destroyed more lives than cholera, all for money and personal gain. Winters's voice carried the weight of long-carried guilt. I should have spoken up years ago, but I was young and scared. Now I hear he's been complicating your situation. That's one way to put it. Well, I've got something might interest you. Winters reached into his saddlebag and withdrew a bundle of letters tied with faded ribbon. Correspondence between Caldwell and his Confederates, including specific mention of arranging the Linwood-Kettering marriage. Mara's hands trembled as she accepted the letters. Even in the fading light, she could see her own name scattered throughout the pages, discussed like a commodity to be bought and sold. Why bring these to me now? Because I heard about what you did during the fire, risking your life to save that boy. That's not the action of someone evil. That's someone who's been carrying blame that belongs elsewhere. Winters climbed back onto his horse. Time that blame found its rightful owner. As Winters rode away, Mara clutched the letters to her chest and felt the last pieces of her puzzle clicking into place. Tomorrow, she would have her reckoning with Isaac Caldwell. But first she needed to survive the night. The attack came at midnight, swift and silent as death itself. Mara woke to the smell of smoke and the sound of Eli's terrified whimpering from the next room. Through the window, she could see flames licking at the barn's foundation. Someone had set fire to the hay stored there. Jed, she hissed, shaking her husband awake. Fire. They stumbled from bed to find their house surrounded by armed men on horseback, more than the 3 from the previous attack. These weren't angry townspeople or drunken vigilantes. These were professionals moving with military precision. Come out, Mara Linwood. A familiar voice called from the darkness. Time to finish what we started in Dodge City. Marcus Kettering had returned, bringing reinforcements and a plan that brooked no interference. The barn was fully ablaze, now flames reaching toward the house with hungry fingers. We can't go out there, Jed said grimly, checking his rifle. They'll cut us down the moment we show ourselves. And we can't stay. Mara replied, watching the fire spread closer. They mean to burn us out or burn us alive. That's when Eli spoke up with the calm certainty that sometimes came from children in crisis. The root cellar, he said quietly. Tunnel goes under the chicken coop to the creek. Ma showed me before she died, said it was for tornadoes. Sarah's storm cellar, Jed had forgotten about the escape tunnel she'd insisted on digging during their first year of marriage. It hadn't been used in years, might be collapsed or flooded, but it was their only chance. They gathered what they could carry: weapons, ammunition, the precious letters proving Crane's guilt, and slipped through the kitchen floor into the cellar below. The tunnel was cramped, dark, and filled with the musty smell of long disuse, but it held. They emerged near the creek, 200 yards from the house, just as the roof caught fire. Through the smoke and flame, they could see the Kettering brothers and their hired guns, maintaining their perimeter, waiting for their quarry to emerge. They'll figure out we're gone soon enough, Jed said grimly. We need somewhere safe to make our stand. The church, Mara said suddenly. It's stone construction, defensible, and... She smiled grimly. I think it's time for a final reckoning with our good Reverend. They made their way through the darkness, using creek beds and fence lines for cover, while behind them, their home burned like a beacon against the night sky. By the time they reached the church, the fire had attracted half the town, creating enough confusion to mask their approach. Reverend Crane stood in the church doorway, ostensibly organizing bucket brigades and rescue efforts. But Mara could see the satisfaction in his eyes as he watched her sanctuary burn, the look of a man whose plans were finally coming together. Reverend, she called softly from the shadows beside the church. Crane spun around his face, cycling through surprise, fear, and calculation in rapid succession. Mrs. Holt, thank God you're safe. When we saw the fire, cut the act, Isaac. Mara stepped into the light, the bundle of letters clearly visible in her hands. It's over. The name hit Crane like a physical blow. His carefully maintained facade cracked, revealing the predator beneath. I don't know what you're talking about. Isaac Caldwell, marriage broker, fraud artist, destroyer of lives. Mara held up the letters, including mine. Crane's eyes fixed on the correspondence with the intensity of a starving man seeing food. Those letters were his death warrant, and they both knew it. Where did you get those? Does it matter? What matters is what they prove: that you arranged my marriage to Thomas Kettering, that you pocketed money that never existed, that you set me up to take the blame when your lies led to violence. Around them, the town bustled with firefighting efforts, but in the shadow of the church, predator and prey faced each other with nowhere left to run. You can't prove anything, Crane said, but his voice lacked conviction. Can't I? Jake Winters remembers you. Doc Morrison remembers you. These letters remember you. Mara's voice grew stronger with each word. How many other women, Isaac? How many other lives did you destroy for money? That's when Crane made his final desperate play. The Derringer appeared in his hand, with practiced speed, a weapon meant for close quarters work and final solutions. But instead of pointing it at Mara, he grabbed Eli, who'd been standing quietly beside his stepmother. You always were too clever for your own good. Crane snarled, pressing the gun barrel against the boy's temple. Should have kept running instead of trying to build a life you don't deserve. Eli went rigid with terror, but his eyes remained fixed on Mara's face with absolute trust. He believed she would save him the way she'd saved Tommy Morrison from the fire. Let him go, Mara said quietly. Your quarrel is with me. My quarrel is with anyone who threatens my carefully built life. I've spent 15 years becoming Isaiah Crane, and I won't let some murdering whore destroy that. I never murdered anyone. You know that. Thomas Kettering died because you told him to keep his wife in line when he started asking about the missing dowry money. Prove it. I don't have to. Mara nodded toward the letters in her hand. It's all here, Isaac. In your own words. Your instructions to your confederates, your percentage of each fraudulent transaction, your advice on handling difficult women. Crane's face twisted with rage and desperation. He'd been cornered by his own greed, trapped by evidence he'd thought destroyed years ago. And then I guess there's only one solution, he said, tightening his grip on Eli. If I can't preserve my secret, I'll at least have the satisfaction of destroying yours. That's when Jed moved. He'd been circling through the shadows during the confrontation, using Mara's voice to mask his approach. When Crane raised the derringer to fire at his stepson, Jed struck from behind with the butt of his rifle. The blow should have ended things cleanly, but Crane was tougher than he looked. He spun with the impact, the derringer discharging wild but still dangerous. The bullet shattered the church's stained glass window in an explosion of colored fragments. Eli broke free and ran to Mara, while Jed and Crane wrestled for control of the weapon. Both men were strong, but Crane fought with the desperate fury of a cornered animal, while Jed was hampered by concern for innocence in the line of fire. The second shot took Crane in the shoulder, spinning him around and sending him crashing into the church's stone wall. He slumped to the ground, his clerical collar stained with blood, the derringer skittering across the ground beyond reach. It's over, Jed said grimly, standing over the wounded man. No. Crane gasped, his face twisted with pain and hatred. It's never over. Even if you destroy me, there will always be others. Always be someone ready to use women like her and throw them away when they're no longer useful. Maybe, Mara said quietly, kneeling beside her tormentor. But today, you're the only one who matters. The sound of approaching footsteps announced the arrival of Judge Whitmore and several deputies, drawn by the gunshots and the commotion. They found a scene that would be talked about for years, then the town's respected preacher bleeding on the church steps, a woman holding letters that would rewrite local history, and a family that had survived more trials than any should have to endure. Oh, well, Judge Whitmore said after hearing their story and examining the evidence. I'd say this calls for a very public trial. Time this town learned the whole truth about its spiritual leader. The trial of Isaac Caldwell, alias Reverend Isaiah Crane, drew spectators from 3 counties. For 5 days, the courthouse was packed beyond capacity as witness after witness testified to the scope of his crimes. Jake Winters took the stand to describe the marriage schemes he'd witnessed in Missouri. Doc Morrison finally found the courage to testify about the woman who died from her husband's brutality after Caldwell arranged her marriage. 3 other victims of similar frauds made the journey to Ash Hollow to tell their stories. But the most devastating testimony came from Mara herself. Standing in the witness box with quiet dignity, she read passages from Caldwell's own letters, cold, calculating descriptions of how to manipulate desperate women and violent men for maximum profit. Standing in the witness box with quiet dignity, she read passages from Caldwell's own letters, cold, calculating descriptions of how to manipulate desperate women and violent men for maximum profit. The Linwood woman is perfect for our purposes. She read aloud, her voice steady, despite the tremor in her hands. Orphaned, desperate, with just enough education to seem respectable. Kettering will pay handsomely for such a prize, and if she proves troublesome, his reputation for violence should keep her in line. A collective gasp swept through the courtroom. Even those who'd harbored suspicions about Mara's character couldn't deny the damning evidence of premeditated fraud. If complications arise, she continued, ensure all blame falls on the woman. Dead men tell no tales, but living women make convenient scapegoats. Caldwell, he'd given up the pretense of being Reverend Crane, sat slumped in the defendant's chair, his face gray with pain and defeat. His shoulder wound had healed poorly, leaving him diminished and frail, but his eyes still burned with unrepentant hatred. When called to testify in his own defense, he shocked everyone by standing with visible effort and delivering what amounted to a confession. Yes, I arranged fraudulent marriages. He said, his voice carrying none of its former authority. Yes, I took money from both sides while lying to everyone involved. Yes, I followed this woman to Ash Hollow to ensure my secret stayed buried. The courtroom erupted in shocked murmurs, but Caldwell continued with bitter satisfaction. But I regret nothing. These women were commodities, nothing more. They wanted husbands. Men wanted wives, and I provided a service. If some arrangements ended badly, that's the price of business. Judge Whitmore's gavel crashed down, repeatedly restoring order to the chaos. Mr. Caldwell, you're testifying against your own interests. My interests are already destroyed thanks to that murderous witch in the witness box. At least now everyone knows what she really is, a killer who'd stop at nothing to save her own skin. The accusation hung in the air like smoke, threatening to undo everything Mara had fought to prove. But before anyone could respond, 8-year-old Lucy Patterson stood up in the gallery. That's not true. The girl's clear voice cut through the courtroom noise. Mrs. Holt saved Tommy Morrison from the fire. She's not a killer, she's a hero. Lucy, sit down, her father hissed, but Judge Whitmore gestured for the child to continue. Miss Mara teaches us to read and write and think for ourselves, Lucy said with a fearless honesty only children possessed. She never makes anyone feel stupid, even when they make mistakes. And she did save Tommy. I saw it with my own eyes. One by one, other children in the gallery stood up, adding their voices to Lucy's defense. Tommy Morrison himself, now 9 years old and healthy, spoke about the woman who'd carried him from the flames. The Morton twins described how Mara had transformed them from troublemakers into eager students. It was Eli who delivered the final blow to Caldwell's character assassination. The 11-year-old walked to the front of the courtroom with quiet dignity, his dark eyes fixed on the man who'd tried to destroy his family. You said my ma is a killer, he said, his voice carrying clearly through the packed room. But I know what a killer looks like, because I watched my first ma die inch by inch from the sickness that ate her from inside. The courtroom fell silent, hanging on every word from this child who'd found his voice through loving the woman on trial. A killer takes life away. My ma gives life back. She gave me my voice when I thought I'd lost it forever. She gave Pa his smile back when he thought it was buried with my first ma. She gave this whole town a chance to see what real courage looks like. Eli turned to face Caldwell directly, his young face serious but unafraid. You're the killer here. You killed trust and hope and the chance for people to find happiness. But you couldn't kill us, and you couldn't kill the truth. The boy's words hung in the air, like a benediction transforming the trial, from a legal proceeding into something approaching a spiritual reckoning. Judge Whitmore's verdict was swift and uncompromising. Isaac Caldwell was sentenced to 20 years in territorial prison for fraud, conspiracy, attempted murder, and a host of other charges. More importantly, Mara Linwood Holt was formally exonerated of any wrongdoing in Thomas Kettering's death. But the trial's end brought new challenges. The fire that had destroyed their home also consumed most of their possessions, leaving the family homeless and nearly destitute. Several townspeople offered temporary shelter, but Jed was reluctant to impose on neighbors who'd only recently accepted them. The solution came from an unexpected source. Judge Whitmore, impressed by the family's courage and touched by their plight, offered Jed a position as territorial deputy marshal. The job came with steady pay respect and a house in the county seat. It's good work for a good man, the judge explained. And frankly, after everything you've been through, I think you've earned the right to wear a badge and have people look up to you instead of down on you. Jed was tempted. The offer represented security and respect his family had never known, but when he looked at Eli and Mara, he saw the same truth reflected in their eyes. I appreciate the offer, Judge, but our home is here. We'll rebuild. Here, after everything this town put you through, especially because of what we went through. Mara's voice carried quiet conviction. We didn't fight this hard to prove we belong just to walk away. Besides, someone needs to teach those children, and Ellen's talking about retirement. The rebuilding effort became a community project that surprised everyone involved. Frank Crowley donated lumber at cost, while his wife Martha organized meal deliveries for the work crews. Doc Morrison provided medical attention for construction injuries, refusing all payment. Even Mayor Hutchins, who'd been among Mara's harshest critics, appeared with a wagon full of salvaged furniture and a grudging apology. "Seems I misjudged the situation," he said awkwardly. "What that Caldwell fellow did? Well, it changes things. Changes how a man looks at what he thought he knew." The new house rose from the ashes of the old, larger and more comfortable than what they'd lost. But more importantly, it rose with the help of neighbors who'd become friends, built by hands that had learned to trust again. Not everyone participated in the rebuilding, and not everyone would ever fully accept Mara's place in their community. But enough did to make the difference between mere tolerance and genuine belonging. The wedding ceremony Judge Whitmore had interrupted months earlier was finally completed on a crisp October morning, with the couple renewing their vows before God and community. This time, the guest list included most of the town's families, creating a celebration that healed as much as it honored. Ellen Carver had altered Sarah's wedding dress to fit Mara perfectly, adding new lace that transformed memorial into celebration. Jed wore his best suit, brushed and pressed for the occasion, while Eli served as ring bearer with obvious pride. When Judge Whitmore pronounced them husband and wife again, the gathering erupted in genuine joy. Doc Morrison produced a wedding cake commissioned from the county seat, while Frank Crowley surprised everyone with champagne he'd been saving for a special occasion. "Think it'll stick this time?" Ellen Carver asked Mara during the reception, nodding toward the townspeople who'd come to celebrate. "Some of it will," Mara replied, watching children play while their parents made careful conversation with former enemies. "Some won't, but that's enough." 6 months later, Catherine Kettering arrived, unannounced, her traveling clothes dusty from the long journey west. The woman who climbed down from the hired buggy bore little resemblance to the grief-stricken sister who'd let hatred guide her family's pursuit. "I've come to apologize," she said simply, standing in the parlor of the rebuilt house. "For the lies we told, the pain we caused, the way we nearly destroyed innocent people to avoid facing our own guilt." She'd brought legal documents officially exonerating Mara of any wrongdoing in Thomas's death, along with sworn statements from other family members admitting they'd known about his violent tendencies. "Why now?" Mara asked, accepting the papers that represented her complete legal vindication. "Because we heard about the trial, about what really happened. And because my nephew was asking questions about his father that I couldn't answer with lies anymore." Catherine's voice carried the weight of long-suppressed guilt. "He deserves to know the truth about Thomas, and you deserved better than what we gave you." Catherine stayed for a week, sharing stories about Thomas's childhood that helped Mara understand the man he'd been before alcohol and violence consumed him. It didn't excuse what he'd done, but it provided a measure of closure she hadn't known she needed. "You've built something beautiful here," Catherine observed on her last evening, watching Jed and Eli work together in the barn while Mara prepared supper. "Thomas never gave you this peace, safety, the chance to be yourself." "No," Mara agreed. "But his death led me here eventually. Maybe that's enough redemption for both of us." The news that changed everything came on a warm spring morning when Mara was working in the school garden with her students. She'd been feeling unwell for several weeks, fatigue, morning nausea, an odd sensitivity to smells that reminded her of something she'd almost forgotten. Dr. Morrison confirmed what she'd already suspected. "About 3 months along, I'd say," he told her with a smile that split his weathered face. "Congratulations, Mrs. Holt. You're going to be a mother." The announcement at the spring social was greeted with cheers from some, polite applause from others, and stony silence from the few who still harbored resentment. But for the first time since her arrival in Ash Hollow, the silence felt like a minority opinion. Eli was beside himself with excitement at the prospect of becoming a big brother. He appointed himself chief protector of his stepmother and unborn sibling, hovering anxiously whenever Mara climbed steps or lifted heavy objects. "You're going to wear yourself out worrying," she told him one afternoon as they planted vegetables in the kitchen garden. "I just want to make sure nothing bad happens." He replied with the serious concern of someone who'd learned too young that people you love could disappear without warning. Bad things might happen. Mara acknowledged, pausing to look directly at her stepson. "They happen to everyone. But good things happen too, Eli. Sometimes they take longer to arrive, and sometimes they come disguised as something else. But they do come." She gestured toward the horizon, where storm clouds gathered with the promise of life-giving rain. Where Jed worked with cattle that would feed them through another winter, where their future stretched like an endless road, filled with possibility. The important thing is recognizing good things when they arrive and holding on to them. Sarah Elizabeth Holt was born on a crisp autumn morning when the cottonwoods had turned gold, and the first frost sparkled like scattered diamonds. She entered the world with a lusty cry that announced her intention to be heard and respected. Doc Morrison delivered the child with practice skill and genuine joy, assisted by Ellen Carver's competent hands, while Jed paced the kitchen and Eli pressed his ear to the bedroom door. "She's perfect," Doc announced, placing the cleaned and swaddled infant in Mara's arms. 10 fingers, 10 toes, and lungs that could wake the dead. As Mara held her daughter for the first time, feeling the perfect weight of new life against her chest, she understood with perfect clarity that this was what she'd been searching for, not universal acceptance or complete vindication, but simply a place to belong and people to love who would love her in return. The sound of horses in the yard drew their attention to the window where half the town was arriving with food gifts and quiet celebration. Martha Crowley carried preserves, Frank brought a hand-carved cradle he'd been secretly building, and even Mayor Hutchins appeared with his best whiskey to toast the new arrival. "Seems like the whole town's here." Jed observed, emotion thick in his voice. "Not the whole town." Mara corrected gently, thinking of families who would never fully accept her, who would always see her as an outsider marked by scandal. But enough. More than enough. As the sun set over the prairie and friends gradually departed, the Holt family found themselves alone with their newest member. Sarah slept peacefully, while Eli sat beside the bed, stroking his sister's tiny hand with reverent gentleness. "She's beautiful," he whispered. "She is, and she's lucky to have a big brother who'll protect her and teach her about life on the prairie. I'll tell her about you," Eli promised solemnly. "About how brave you are, how you saved Tommy Morrison, how you made Pa smile again. I'll make sure she knows that sometimes the best things come from the worst beginnings." Outside, wind sang through the cottonwoods with the voice of seasons changing and time passing, carrying promises of challenges yet to come and joys yet to be discovered. But inside the house, surrounded by the people she loved most, Mara Holt had finally found what she'd searched for all her life. She belonged here, Scars, and all accepted, not because she was perfect, but because she was real. She had faced fire and emerged tempered rather than broken, had confronted hatred and answered with courage, had built a life worth living from the ashes of everything she'd lost. Some people in Ash Hollow would never fully accept her. Martha Crowley still pursed her lips when they met on the street, and the Hutchins family maintained polite but distant relations. Others, like the Patterson and Morrison families, had become genuine friends and allies. But Mara had learned that belonging wasn't about universal acceptance. It was about finding your people, those who saw past surface judgments, to the person beneath who stood with you when standing was difficult, who chose love over fear when the choice mattered most. As she held her daughter close and watched Eli explain to the baby how the stars worked, Mara felt the last weight of her past finally lift from her shoulders. She was no longer running from who she'd been or trying to prove who she might become. She was simply Mara Holt, wife, mother, teacher, survivor. A woman who'd saved a boy from flames, and in doing so, saved herself. In Ash Hollow, as the prairie grass whispered secrets to the night wind, and the stars wheeled overhead in their ancient patterns that was more than enough. It was everything.